Welcome to the reformerpilates.com podcast and the episode Train Them or Lose Them, where we explore what it really takes to build lasting success in Pilates studios and in the teaching profession. In this episode, I'm joined by someone who has been at the very heart of Pilates for nearly 5 decades, Michael King. Michael began his teaching journey 47 years ago, opening one of the first Pilates studios in London at Pineapple Dance Studios. He went on to manage the Houston Ballet's Pilates studio, one of the first in the US to open its doors to the public while supporting a professional dance company. His career took him to Los Angeles, where he worked with some of the top studios and private clients long before Pilates was mainstream in home training. On returning to London, he founded the Pilates Institute, which played a pivotal role in setting national standards, including the Level 3 Pilates qualifications in the UK. Today, Michael continues to shape the industry through his thriving studio in South Kensington, where he's championing reformer teaching and mentoring the next generation of teachers. We dive into his journey, the philosophy of teaching, the reformer revolution, and why investing in teachers isn't just important, it's essential for the future of the industry. Let's get into it. Michael, welcome. Absolutely delighted to have you on the reformerpilates.com podcast. I've done a little introduction already, so if it's good with you, I'd love to just get into it. And my first question, Michael, can you take us back to your early days and how did your journey from the world of dance lead you to Pilates?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's my honor to be here. Early days. I'm going to have to really rewind now.
Yeah, take us back.
Well, I was like the Billy Elliot before Billy Elliot existed. I was a dancer. I went to dance school. Initially, in my sixth form, I was dancing from the age of 14. I finished up at a school in London called the London School of Contemporary Dance, The Place. It was, back then, boys didn't dance. In fact, my school teacher used to torture me. My games teacher used to torture me to want to play football when all I wanted to do is do gymnastics. But I was very excited. I got a place in this London School of Contemporary Dance. It was a 3-year course. Every year they cut the numbers by half, so the pressure was on. And it was actually the school that sent the man Alan Herdman, the master, Mr. Herdman, over to New York to bring Pilates into the UK. Now, looking back, Pilates was coming into the UK in the 1960s, mainly with a dance company, the Ballet Romana. They had visiting teachers come in. But Alan was the first man to a British man to actually bring it into the UK. And he always tells the story, which I always laugh every time I tell the story. He said, they don't know quite what it is, but they think it might be quite good for the dancers. So he went over to New York, trained with Carola and Robert Fitzgerald, and then brought it back to the UK. So it was really the birthplace of Pilates in the UK. There was nobody else doing it at that time. I was a dancer in school, and it's a Graham school, which is a dance method. And if anyone's familiar will know that Martha Graham and Joseph Pilates, sidebar, hated each other because it was really, when they were developing their own methods, it was a very different time in history. And Martha Graham was a really innovator with the dance world. Her whole dance was about feelings, emotion, and it was based on her body, which the big difference between a man's body and a woman's body is the pelvis. Men have heavier pelvises, there's less rotation. So doing her method, I was always tight. I was always had a lot of tension. And one day, my dance teacher, my Graham teacher was American, put a foot on my back and said, "Get your head on your feet," and put my back out. Now, until that point, we were doing Pilates with Alan, and there was another teacher called Sonia at the school. And we all not hated it, we just didn't see the point of it. You know, we were dancers, we wanted to dance. And so really, with that introduction from my first injury of my back, I had to do Pilates. There was no choice. I had to just go in and learn Pilates. And it was really when I discovered what it was. Before, many young people, you know, their bodies do what they do very easily. When you have an injury, suddenly you look at things differently. So that was my introduction to Pilates. Alan left the place and set up his own studio, and he took me and another dancer called Julian Littlefoot to go and work in his studios. Now, he always tells the story that he just hired us to paint the studio. But actually, he trained us in a very different way to what we get trained today. It was very much an apprentice system. In fact, I remember I had to sit and watch for 200 hours him teaching, which at the time it was like torture. But looking back on it, I realized how valuable that was. And so I managed his studio, and then he'd opened studios in the meantime in Tel Aviv with the Backdoor Company. That was the second studio in Europe. And then he also opened a studio in Houston with Houston Ballet. So he sent me the teacher, he sent him to Houston Ballet, got his green card and got a much better job. And so he sent me over there to teach while they found a replacement. Of course, it was Texas. I loved it. I wanted to stay there, but he wouldn't let me. So I said, well, if I can't stay here, I'm coming back to London and I'm going to open my own studio, which I did at Pineapple Dance Studios, which was just opening in Covent Garden. So that's kind of the fast view of it. And as I say, going back, you know, as many people do, they come across Pilates when they're injured, and which is really sad, because if they'd done Pilates before, they probably wouldn't have had the injury.
That's quite the journey, Michael. I love the start of it. Billy Elliot. Side question: do you love the Billy Elliot film?
I do, but I just put myself, because I say he had an easy time. I mean, the kid, it was a breeze. I mean, me growing up as a dancer in Scunthorpe, which I grew up, I was born in Lincoln, grew up in Scunthorpe. It was torture. Boys did not dance. So I just look at that thinking it's a bit Disneyland for me. You know, it's a happy story. I fought. I really had a passion for dance. And I just wanted to do it. So even though this games teacher bullied me into wanting to just play football, I just kept moving forward. And I think that determination is probably made me who I am today, because that determination of just move forward, whatever happens, just keep moving forward, is still there.
Yeah, amazing. So there's no Julie Walters in that kind of early experience, but you wish. I know that you worked with some of the legends you've referred to. So again, from those experiences, what stands out in terms of how it's kind of shaped your teaching today?
Well, the first thing I have to say is when you train with somebody, you think you know everything. And you do know something, but you suddenly realize what happened was I was at Pineapple for about 2 years, and then Houston Ballet asked me to go back. Of course, I was out of there quicker than you could say anything. One of the first things I did was they sent me out from Houston to New York to go take classes with Romana and also with Carola. Carola was there. And then over to Los Angeles with Ron Fletcher, who was another legend. I took classes with him and his teachers that were teaching. It was in Houston, they wanted the best Pilates studio. It was set up for the dancers, but it made a ton of money. When the dancers started dancing in the morning, then we had outside people come in. And because it was the ballet, it really funded a lot of the academy, the dance school. And definitely we were 4 of us teaching there, and we doubled our budget every year. It was on the income level, it was very good. So I was there for 10 years, and it was a great experience. So going out, I suddenly realized, I don't know anything. I know something, but there's a whole world out there, a tapestry, shall we call it, of different styles and different variations. So I think the thing that we all do is we want it to be simple. And the last thing it is simple because people's bodies are not simple. And Carola and Romana, they were only a couple of streets away from each other in New York, but they had a very different view of the method. Carola was not so heavy springs. Romana was very heavy springs. Now Romana was heard to be this fierce lady. She was never fierce with me. She was delightful. Although when I showed up, the teacher that was teaching me initially said, "Oh no, you have to have been coming here for 5 years before Romana will teach you." And I said, "Oh, okay." Not knowing, I was just, whatever. Back then, because they were just teachers. And coming from the dance world, there was a lot of, shall we say, egos in the dance world. But when Romana came in, she came straight over to me. And whether it's because I was male, whether it's a dancer or British, I don't know. But she started working with me. And she was very detailed. I mean, she really wanted it to be exact. Now, Carola was very different as a teacher because she would walk over, she had a stick. Now, I don't know how old she would have been. I mean, I was young, but she must have been 70s. And then she wore just a leotard and she had a stick. She would poke you with a stick and she would say, "You're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong," but never tell you what you're doing wrong. So you're laying there thinking, I think I'm doing everything right. So this, I learned, and with Ron Fletcher had a very creative style. So I learned there is this tapestry, and it's the same in yoga. You know, I always say with different styles of yoga, it's all yoga. But with the static yoga, with the movement yoga, with all these variations, it's all yoga. And Pilates has that depth of having different styles. Today we call them legacy programs. You know, Kathy Grant, Fletcher Pilates, I mean, these are legacy programs. So you learn what you learn with the school you train with, but then the journey starts. You know, it really does. Okay. You go and see, ultimately you should have your style. It really doesn't matter who you train with. You know, people use it sometimes as marketing, especially the big brands and that, you know, I'm a teacher. I'm like, that's great, but you're a teacher. You know, you have your style, which I think is so important. If you work for a studio, obviously the studio has to have a style. You know, you can't have these rock stars doing something very different in these studios if it doesn't have a synergy. But definitely there are different ways and approaches to the Pilates method.
So I'm keen to come back to that question of teaching and, you know, instructing, I suppose, the difference between the two. But just one last question on you specifically, Michael, and your, you know, performing arts background. How has that kind of influenced the way you see movement in terms of Pilates teaching?
Well, that comes back to the styles. I mean, again, Maurice Stott from Stott Pilates was a dancer, and she trained with Romana. And everyone's background will determine the style. Definitely, if you come from a movement background, you spend your life perfecting movement. Also, dance is very disciplined. And so I think that brings, a bit like a painter saying the painting's never finished, that brings you to be a little bit more challenging on the details, on the technique, on the method. I think that instinct is instinctive. If you come from a dance background, you want to perfect what you're doing to be the best it can be, and not just a movement.
Yeah, thank you. So, coming to the topic of what you do today, which is providing, you know, teaching for studios all over the world. And I've heard you say, you know, the strength of any studio lies in its teachers. That is the brand, that is the product, that is the proposition. But what does investing in teachers actually look like in practice?
Well, I think if you work alone, you're responsible for everything, you know, often marketing as well as the teaching style. I think the door really is challenging, or the pathway is challenging when you start having teachers work with you. You know, a good studio manager or studio owner, if they're teachers themselves, should lead the studio. It should determine what the teachers need. Now, obviously, you need something to start teaching. You can't just magically know everything. I mean, as I say, I was Alan's manager at 19 years of age. So I get really scratch my head sometimes that, you know, age is important. But of course, the way we trained with him was a mentorship. You know, he was there every day. I watched him teach. He corrected me, usually in front of the clients. He corrected me the way I was doing things. So that's a very different system of training, being in there with your teachers, than it is running a course. You know, I think it's one of the biggest challenges you've got today is that the way the courses are run will give you some information. But when it comes to CPD, it sounds very alien. CPD is personal. What do you know, what you don't know? You know, it's really about where your, not holes, because that sounds like things missing. How can you develop your own style, your own teaching? And I think a studio manager should lead that. They should recognize what's needed in their teacher's education. And so in a way, if you're working with your teachers, like I did with Alan, then you can start a mentorship program. You can lead and watch, but it takes time because, days get long. Nobody has any hours to sit and watch teachers teaching, which is what you need to do. Everyone in the course, everyone on the course will sit there and nod. And then when they go away, you don't really know what they're doing when they start teaching. So somehow there has to be kind of ongoing assessment. And I don't mean you're fired type of assessment. I mean, just kind of an assessment to really sum up the needs of what those teachers need. And the amazing thing about our industry of movement, because we are movement teachers, is there's new things all the time, research coming out. I mean, the fascia revolution has changed the way we're looking at movement. And I walk every morning and I listen to podcasts, I listen to things, I try and learn something every day. And it's amazing the variety of things out there you can learn about, not just limited to Pilates, but limited to the body. When you're dealing with clients, when you're dealing with conversations about things, you have to keep learning yourself. There has to be that drive. And in a way, even though there might be a studio manager, as a teacher, you have to self-motivate. You have to say, okay, I need to do this. Otherwise you're going to burn out. Because if you've got nothing feeding you, you've got nothing to feed your clients. So and the guidance from whoever's the studio manager needs to decide what kind of studio they want. What do they want in here? Is it everyone doing the same thing? Is it, allowing the teachers to change or to modify or to do things? That's completely up to whoever's leading the program.
So is that really the difference between teachers or instructors rather that can do the moves, understand the repertoire, and those that actually understand and truly teach the Pilates method? Is that the point of difference, do you think?
Yeah, it's down in the word. Instructors instruct movement. Teachers teach method. In education, a teacher is responsible for outcome. And that's the big thing. A teacher in a school or university is responsible to show that their students have got it. But a teacher is responsible for the clients getting it, not just teaching or not just instructing. But there are days I know I'm an instructor. There's days I know I'm a teacher. It's not like you're one or the other, but you have to know when you're teaching method. And it really started in Australia. Australia started categories of teachers as method Pilates teachers and also as fitness instructors, which is a bit difficult in the UK because there's a brand called Fitness Pilates. So we can't completely go and use that name. But it is a difference between what you say. I mean, our big rule is that 50% of what you say should be directional. People need to know which way they want to go, when they need to breathe. But that's only 50% of what you say. 50% of what you should be talking or having conversations with the clients is about the benefits of the method, what they're doing, why they're doing it, what the method's for. It's kind of a conversation you have with them and really connect with the client. And I can walk into a studio instantly and know if the people are method teachers or if they're fitness Pilates teachers.
And you shared there, Michael, you're on this kind of constant learning, right? I've similar thing myself of committing, understanding or learning something new every day. That's critical in studios to truly execute on, continuing professional development. But how do you think studios can create that culture to really deliver that effectively?
The magic of this is the body doesn't change you by doing complicated acrobatic things. That's not how the body changes. The body changes by doing simple things every day. So one of the things I get asked about on the Reformer is it important to do the foot series? And after I pick myself off the floor, I go, my God, yes. I said, do you understand that everything starts at the feet? Misalignment of the feet can go up the body. Your whole shape of what you're doing starts from the feet. So if you're going to start changing bodies, we have to do the foot series. It's a great way of getting client into the room. Somebody could have had a very stressful day, work, lots of things going on. It's a time when they really become centered. So the foot series is really important, and it's doing that simple thing a lot. It's going to change their feet and change their body. Now, what we have to do is make the simple interesting. You can't. And what I see many times on Instagram is where people are inventing movements. Or like, we don't need to invent. Everything's there. And it drives me a little bit crazy when I see phrases, Pilates reinvented, Pilates redesigned. I'm like, why do you think it's lasted so long? It's lasted so long because it works. Learn the repertoire. And I think this is one of the challenges if somebody's not really fully trained in the repertoire, they haven't got a lot to choose from. And that's when I see them reaching out, inventing easy things, which are not method. There's no purpose to it. It's performance. And now, listen, I'll watch on anybody like everyone does, but I look at it realizing it's not teaching, it's performing. And, they look great, but it's not what we're doing. So it's simple things every day done regularly. It's changing the body. But again, yes, people say, oh, it's boring. If a client says to me, oh, I tried Pilates, it was boring, that shows me the teacher wasn't teaching method. If you get the clients thinking about the breath, the center, the alignment, the details, all the principles of Pilates, that's a lot to think about. You'll never be bored if you get the clients thinking about the principles. But that comes from knowing that this method can change bodies. And I've seen bodies change. But I honestly, by doing dramatic splits, cartwheels, balancing on a ball, whatever you want to do on the Reformer, that's not going to change your body. That's just entertaining. It's like giving sugar to kids. We know sugar's bad, but then sometimes we just shut them up by giving some sweets. If you're going to give sugar, know when you're doing it. But don't think the sugar is it. The fast, the dynamic, all those things are fun. It's sugar. We have to realize what this method is about. And I've been doing it for a long time. And if it was going to change the body quicker, trust me, I would be the first one doing it. But it doesn't. I know it doesn't.
So how do you manage that, Michael, in today's environment where, there's lots of directions it's going, as you say, right? Whether it's reinvented, reimagined, okay, that it can't be, but there's lots of stuff that people are adding, as you describe it there, is sugar. But how do you ensure that you kind of come back to those classic principles, and ensure that it's still delivering the huge value that it should do?
My job as a teacher is to find the muscles you're not using. So what you need to target is not the strong superficial muscles, because if a client's exercising already, if they're running, spinning or whatever they're doing, CrossFit, those muscles are getting trained. Your job as a teacher is to find the muscles they're not using. And that will be difficult for the client. If the client can't do something, they listen. If they're suddenly, oh my God, I can't do this, and it's down to playing with the springs. On the Reformer, it's down to what you're asking them to do. So you have to know it's a game, and it's a little bit of a jigsaw puzzle because we're not all the same. We've got different bodies, different postures, different muscle strengths. Your background will, as I said earlier, will bring different things to what you need to do in the studio. And so I can have a professional basketball player right next to a grandmother who's never exercised, and they're both feeling difficulty for different reasons. Now, it's not usually they're doing the same movement. It's usually different exercise they're doing. So you have to recognize, you have to learn the body, you have to understand how the body works. And that's a big subject because that's what keeps changing. As I say, this fascia revolution we've had completely changed our view of how we move. And it's still changing. I mean, there's people out there right now doing research on it. I just listened to a podcast where it was saying that they found out completely by accident, by holding a stretch like you would in yoga, it actually helped with inflammation, which they said, we weren't even expecting that. They said, it's the last thing we expected to find when we started looking at stretching fascia, that actually it's a good way. And that was like, I'd never heard that before. So those kind of things excite me because I want to learn and understand the body a lot more than, I don't want to go to dissection. I don't need to be a doctor. I don't need to be a physiotherapist, but I do need to understand when somebody can't do something, what's limiting them.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. So coming to the Reformer world specifically, Reformer Pilates, which is fair to say, exploded in popularity worldwide. From your perspective, and you just kind of touched on it there, where is that headed? Where is teaching headed next for Reformer Pilates specifically?
Listen, I have a group reformer Pilates studio in London, South Kensington, and I'm really excited by this introduction. As I keep calling it, the new family member, because a traditional Pilates studio often will be dealing with people's bodies that have got serious problems. Whether it be knee problems, back problems, whatever it is, their body's not doing what it should do. So there's more kind of post rehab or rehab studios that would not be doing group reformer because they don't have the clients that can do that. What I've noticed with our studio in London, it's a lot younger people coming to group reformer, which is great. It's a whole new generational experience for them. I'm excited that Pilates is living on. But I think we have to recognize first, who are your clients? What clients are going after? What type of Pilates? If it's group reformer, then it has to be safe. I hate when I see people falling off the reformer on videos. I think that's the worst thing we could be sharing for the industry because it makes us all look bad. But I think you have to recognize that normally when people fall off the reformer, they're doing something which is not Pilates. They're doing something which, or they've not got the right springs, or there's a missing element as to why that happens. But I'm excited. I think it's a great opportunity. People across the country, these fitness clubs are investing 10, 15 reformers. We've never had that. I'm just hoping we can guide it to be long term, because with these big investments, we need to see down the road, not just next month. We need to have a plan for 5 years about how we're going to build those client base and keep that client base.
Yeah. And on that topic of the evolution in fitness clubs, in new boutique studios opening, a more kind of a practical question really for anybody listening that's looking to open a studio or recruit new team members. What are the qualities in your mind that make an excellent group reformer teacher beyond just technical skill?
For me, if I was to choose one part of our sector, I would say group reformer needs to be taught by group exercise teachers, because there's something you learn as a group exercise teacher, managing people to move together, that you don't learn as a personal trainer. You don't learn as a massage therapist or a physiotherapist. It's a skill set that you don't have in those other jobs. But group exercise, they're used to teaching a group. And so I find that cueing, because there's a lot more verbal cueing when you've got a group class, I find that I don't have to teach them how to do that. Where a lot of the times when people come to do our group reformer course, and they come from a different background, it's really challenging them to have more of a cueing system, which is more verbal. So yes, I would say if I was opening, well, I try all the time to find new teachers, and I always look for group exercise teachers. That would be my checklist as a really key thing.
Yeah. And we've touched on this already with some of the sugar dopamine hits that you've talked about in some classes, but you've been in this fitness world and the movement world for a very long time. So you've probably seen loads of trends come and go in that time. But, what would you, again, kind of advise in terms of some of the pitfalls of chasing those trends? How can teachers stay grounded in, the method-based programming?
Owning a studio or having a studio is a marathon. You have to train for it. You have to understand it's going to be a long race. You can't, building a client base, in most times we say 18 to 24 months is a general guide on building a client base. So the overheads, you could be very passionate about it. And this is going back to what I say. People say, what's your favorite reformer? And I say, whatever's in front of me. I'm lucky enough, I do travel, and in many countries they make their own reformers. Obviously we have the big brands, which everyone knows. It doesn't matter. The reformer doesn't make the teacher. And unfortunately, in some countries I go to, they think if they're going to buy the most expensive machines, they'll have the best studio. But it's not. It really isn't. They're your tools. Now, of course, it needs to do what it needs to do, because I've been on some that don't. But it's not the reformer. And so I would say wisely, look at budgets, look and see what, get recommendations. If you don't know the brand, if you know the reformer, get on it somehow. And that's why I get nervous about ordering from China. When people contact me every day from China, and literally, I'm not exaggerating, I say, thank you for contacting me. I'm always polite. Where can I see your machines? I'm in UK. I said, I cannot buy a machine until I've seen it. I wouldn't go buy a car until I've seen it. You're spending probably about the same amount of money as a car. So where can I see these machines? And if you can't see them, if you can't get on them or speak to them, actually, there was one company contacted me and they said, well, there's a studio in Switzerland. Now, as it happened, I knew the teacher and the reformers were very cheap. I was like, oh, okay. So I called her up and I said, listen, you're listed as being the representative, and she was on their website. And she was very honest with me. She said, listen, they're not the greatest. It is a good price, but I'm going to have to swap them out in a few years. I know I am, because they're not going to last for a long time. So that would be the main thing is your equipment is important, but it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is your teachers, your team. And unfortunately, like children leaving home, good teachers will always leave you because they will move on to either open their own studio or often become your competitor. But they're good teachers. So I'd rather take good teachers and know that eventually they're going to leave me. Sometimes it's not money, it's just that drives them. Sometimes it is, but it's not always money. Sometimes it is that wanting to have a business themselves and set their own. So I think that it is a marathon. Owning a studio is not something that you think is going to happen quickly. I mean, there's rare opportunities, it does, but you have to build it, have your plan, have your marketing, have everything in place, your website, you name it, it needs to be in place, and know that you're in for the long. And hopefully, there'll be other marathons, but the first one is the longest.
Yeah. And you mentioned there, Michael, that when you've been to other countries, I know you've taught Reformer Pilates teaching all over the world. I think at least 30 countries, if I'm not mistaken.
Actually, a lot more.
Maybe it's
I know.
more.
I saw that. It's a lot more than that. We have 30. Okay. We have 30 training centers in 29 countries. So, amazing. But I'm lucky enough to visit some. Although I do feel a bit like a missionary sometimes. Going into countries that don't have Pilates. I'm back in China again teaching at this amazing convention this year in November, which I'm excited about. There are some events out there which is absolutely motivatingly good, But yes, sorry, I was cut you off. But yeah, a few more countries than 30.
Yeah, but how's it different in some of those countries? Is it wildly different in terms of their understanding and practice of Pilates?
It can be. It really depends on who took it into the country. I mean, if you have a certain style of Pilates that goes into a country, it becomes known as their style, really, and it could be one of the big brands, or it can be, very different. Some countries are not. It's really interesting. Some countries are not doing the group reformer thing. It's still very traditional with the circuit, what I call the circuit studio, the different pieces, rather than just the reformer. Sometimes it's cost. To have 20 reformers or 10 reformers or 15 reformers in some of the low-income countries, that's expensive for them. So it's not possible. And that's where you start seeing them make their own reformers, which you hold your breath a little bit when you see some of them. But it is different. But in some countries, they don't do mat work. I'm like, why do you do mat work? He invented the reformer for mat work. Why would you not do it? They only do apparatus, and in some countries they only do mat work. So that's a big divide. But again, often it comes to income and expenditure and how that, the level of that country, how much teachers earn, to be able, if they can afford a reformer, let alone open a studio.
Yeah. So you think in some cases it's a monetary thing. It's an economy is just not strong enough to sustain orders of 8 or 10 beds or stuff like that. It's not a cultural thing of not wanting to do it. No,
I don't think so. I mean, again, if somebody's gone in with a very specific style, and that becomes kind of the country style almost, then they're kind of influenced, not knowing. It's what you know, what you don't know, you don't know. If they've not done a group reformer class, they don't know how fun it can be, which it can be. So they haven't experienced that.
Yeah. Well, bringing it more back to the UK, what do you see here in terms of the UK getting right?
It comes back to method. I have to say method. I mean, the depth of knowledge you need to keep feeding the machine. You need to motivate yourself. If you have a studio, you are responsible for that studio. And so you're responsible for your teachers. And so you, as I said earlier, you have to self-motivate. And it's hard because days get long and it's stressful sometimes. I would say don't be the cheapest on the planet. Don't be the most expensive on the planet. I think, there's a big, sometimes financial war where people are marketing less price, less price, less price. So that what they're doing really is devaluing the product. Some of the fitness clubs are offering as part of the membership. So that's the worst thing we can have. Because if people think, I can get this as part of my membership, I don't need to pay for it in a studio. So a standalone studio would have, right next to a big fitness club that's giving the classes away as part of the membership, would have a hard time, which again brings us back to location, location, location. Wherever you put your studio would determine the clients. If it's in a residential area, if it's in a business area, that will again sometimes determine what size studio. It's not McDonald's. You can't take sometimes a model that works in one location and make it work exactly the same in another location. Not always. I mean, you can try, but the uniqueness about this is, again, the teachers adapting to the clients. There's a big trend, and I got into myself into so much trouble using the word classical. When somebody says I'm a classical teacher, goes, which classical? Because, unless you train with Joseph Pilates himself, there are different styles out there. So the legacy programs. I mean, Mr. Pilates did very little exercises on the Reformer. Everything was in parallel. Nothing was with a return out. Everything was parallel. And it was only when he died and Romana took over his studio, she added the turnout. So if you want to talk about classical, if you talk about what Mr. Pilates did, then there were very few exercises on the Reformer. And John Steele, who he had, was Clara, Pilates' partner. They were never married. He was her lawyer. When he died, and then Clara unfortunately began losing her sight, the clients kept the studio going. The clients were paying the rent to keep the studio going. This is the original studio. Till Romana came in and took over. And he said, Romana added a lot of movements. At the beginning, there weren't that many movements. So I think, people would need to know when they say the word classical. I mean, Lolita San Miguel, who was one of the original teachers, in fact, her and Kathy Grant and Lolita were the only two teachers who got a certificate from Pilates. She's still teaching. She's amazing. She's in her 90s. She says very clearly there's classical art and there's classical music. There is no such thing as classical Pilates. People have attached, it's almost like a marketing label, almost to say, I'm classical, I'm pure, I'm going to be a better teacher. When really, you need to know the movements, you need to know the traditional movements, 100%. But we are not living in the same time that Joseph Pilates lived. Joseph Pilates did not have a smartphone. Joseph Pilates didn't have a computer. He wasn't sitting behind a desk for 10 hours a day. And so we've changed. So I think knowing the repertoire, knowing the method, and then adapting for your clients, and I think a good studio has to change for the clients coming in. But of course, the classical friends, our family members of the classical world, they don't agree with that. They believe you just do exactly what they believe Joseph Pilates did, which is often what Carola did or what Romana did.
Michael, thank you so much. You are such a wealth of information in this space. I've learned enormous amounts. If there's ever a film made about Reformer Pilates, maybe there has been, or about Pilates I should say exclusively, then you should be starring in it. It would, because it's such an interesting perspective. Thank you. It's a privilege to have you and talk about your experiences and share that with anybody that is invested in this industry. I just have one last question to ask you, which is off topic, and it's just, what has given you unbridled joy in the last week? It doesn't have to be the last week. The last 10 days.
Last week, the weather's been amazing. I would say that's definitely given me some joy, and being able to go outside and enjoy. I live in Scotland now, which is great. I live in a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. And the country, I can see the sea, and so when I get up and I do my walk, like to walk in the morning. In fact, I just thought this morning, I'm so lucky to live here because it's great. You really feel connected with the nature and the area. So I would say that was the biggest joy. Is the weather has been fantastic. Of course, being in Scotland, I know it's not going to last.
We'll take it for now. And lovely if you've been able to get out and walk by the sea. That's beautiful. So thank you so much, Michael. Really appreciate your time, and look forward to maybe doing this again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.